Hey guys, Chris Fix here, and today I'm going to show you how to check your universal joints, also known as U-joints, to see if they are going bad. And if they are going bad, I'm going to show you everything you need to know on how to replace them real easy. That way, instead of going to a mechanic and spending a few $100s to get these replaced, you could do it at home for $20 to $30 using common hand tools. And I'll be showing you two different methods to replace U-joints, such as the press method, which is the first method, and we also have the hammer method, just in case you can't find yourself a press to use. I also have a couple of different drive shafts. We have a drive shaft that has a retaining clip on the outside, and then I have a drive shaft that has the retaining clip on the inside, as well as a drive shaft that has the nylon injection in here, which needs to be heated up and melted out. So I'm going to be covering everything, so after watching this video, you'll know how to diagnose and replace bad U-joints. And since we have to remove the drive shaft to get the U-joints out, if you ever need to replace your drive shaft, this video covers that as well. And if you're wondering if your car uses U-joints, well, most cars and trucks that are rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, and four-wheel drive have U-joints. And to show you where you could find the U-joints in your vehicle, let's go under my truck. Now, universal joints are located at the ends of the drive shaft. You can see the drive shaft going into the rear differential here, and right there is where the universal joint is. Now, if we follow that drive shaft all the way to the front, where the drive shaft meets the transmission or transfer case, you can see we have another U-joint right here. And since this is a four-wheel drive truck, coming out of the transfer case right here, you might have another U-joint. In this case, it's a CV joint, a constant velocity joint. It's a little bit different. But if we keep going forward and follow the front drive shaft to the front differential, you can see we have another U-joint right there. Now, on Jeeps, trucks, and SUVs with a solid front axle, you can find U-joints behind each front wheel. Also, on some rear-wheel drive cars like this Corvette, if we look under the rear axle shafts have U-joints as well, so that's another place to look. So now you know all the different locations that U-joints could be found in your vehicle, but what's the point of them? Why are U-joints even used? While U-joints might be small, they're actually pretty important. They allow the drive shaft to come in at an angle, and they also allow it to move up and down and side to side with the suspension. Now, without a U-joint, this drive shaft would have to be directly connected in line with the differential, and it wouldn't be allowed to move side to side or up or down. It would have to stay in that spot. And I actually have a really good example of how all this works. And that's using a universal joint extension, which you could use to remove hard-to-reach nuts and bolts. Without the universal joint, the socket can't move. It could only spin at that fixed point. If we add our universal joint extension, now the socket could spin and move up and down and side to side. This is good for getting to hard-to-reach bolts, but it's also what allows the drive shaft or axles to move around with the suspension. Alright, so now you know the importance of U-joints and where you could find them. Now let me show you how to tell if they're going bad and need to be replaced. Now, for most vehicles, U-joints don't have a service interval. You just replace these when they're going bad, and that could last the life of the vehicle. With that being said, my truck has over 145,000 miles, yet it has the symptoms of a bad U-joint. So let me show you what causes these U-joints to wear out. U-joints have 4 caps that spin smoothly on needle bearings. At the end of each cap is a rubber boot which prevents dirt and debris from getting in here and damaging the needle bearings. Now, over time, what happens is those rubber caps wear out, and then dirt and debris get in here and damage the needle bearings. Another thing is, over time, the grease that's in these caps dries up and washes away, so the needle bearings run dry, and you can see at the end of the U-joint here, there's all grooves in the trunnion from those needle bearings. So dirt and debris and the lack of grease in your caps could cause play in your U-joint, which means they've gone bad. So there's 3 common symptoms of a bad U-joint, and you can both listen and feel for them. So in order to do that, let's go turn the car on, and we'll quickly run through each symptom. And the first symptom is a clunk when you go from reverse to drive or drive to reverse. And that clunk is from playing the U-joint when the drive shaft changes directions. Now, the second symptom happens while you're driving, and it's a rhythmic click, squeak, or grind that increases in speed the faster you go. And sometimes at higher speeds, that noise might go away completely. And the third and final symptom is if you feel a vibration under your seat, that's an indication that your U-joints are worn out. And for a visual, I have a cup of water in the car, which gives you a real good idea of how much vibration there actually is. Your drive shaft could be spinning over 3,000 RPMs at highway speeds, so any little bit of play in that U-joint is going to cause a vibration. So those are the most common symptoms of a bad U-joint, and you might only have one of those symptoms. And the problem is those symptoms are similar to other car problems you might have. For example, a vibration could be an unbalanced wheel, or a squeak noise could be bad brakes. So in order to find out for sure that your U-joints are bad, we need to go under the truck and inspect them. First, let's do a visual inspection. You want to make sure that the retaining clips are in place and the U-joint isn't pushed in or pushed outward. This looks good, so next we want to check the rubber boots on the caps and make sure they're not damaged. You can see right here the rubber's dry rotted and separated from the cap, so I bet dirt and water got in here causing those bearings to wear out, which is making that noise you heard. And finally, the last thing to do, grab the drive shaft and shake it side to side and up and down. This thing shouldn't budge. There should be no play or movement at all. I like using a pry bar to get in here because sometimes using just your hands isn't enough to move a bad U-joint. So pry at different spots and at different angles. And if you look closely, you can see this U-joint has play in it. So you want to do this quick inspection on all the U-joints in your vehicle. With the bad dust boot and the slight play we have in here, we definitely need to replace this U-joint. And you don't want to be driving around on bad U-joints, which could cause other more serious and dangerous problems. If that U-joint fails, it could cause the drive shaft to disconnect and come flying out as you're driving. Also, all those vibrations that you feel could damage the seal inside the differential and the seal in your transfer case or transmission, which could cause it to leak out fluid. So to prevent those issues, it's cheap and easy to replace your U-joints at home using common hand tools. You'll need tools to remove the drive shaft, which is held in with a couple of bolts, and then to remove the actual U-joint, you could use a hammer or you could use a press. Now, chances are you won't be doing this often. These don't need to be replaced very often, and it's not worth it to buy a whole press kit, which could get expensive. So instead, you could rent this whole kit for free from your local parts store like Advance Auto Parts. And speaking of Advance Auto Parts, I want to thank them for supporting the video and sending out all of these U-joints so I could show you guys how to install them in your vehicle. Not only did they send me the U-joints for my truck, but they sent me high-strength U-joints for my Mustang for when we supercharge it, and high-strength U-joints for my Corvette. I also have a couple of different types here so I could show you the differences so you can pick the correct one to buy. So let me go over which U-joint is right for your vehicle. When buying U-joints, there's two main options you want to consider. The first option is whether or not the U-joint is greasable. Right here you can see a Zerk fitting that goes into the U-joint and allows you to grease all four caps by connecting a grease gun. This one does not have that Zerk fitting, and it's greased for the life of the U-joint. The benefit of being able to grease your U-joint is when the U-joints get old and the grease comes out, or there's dirt and debris that gets in here, you could add the grease could force all that dirt and debris out, and you'll have some new grease in your bearing caps, which could make it last longer. The benefit of a non-greasable is that there's no grease channel in here, so these are actually stronger. Also, this is exactly what stock was. It's non-greasable and it lasted 150,000 miles. So both of these will work great, and it really depends what you want in a U-joint. Now, if you're gonna pick a greasable one, there's two different styles. So we have one that could be greased from the middle right here, and then we have one that could be greased on the end cap. I like the end cap better because it's a lot easier to reach the end cap when it's installed in the vehicle. And besides greasability, the next thing to consider is the strength. So for this, you have the OEM strength, and then you have the high strength U-joints. If you have a daily driver, the OEM strength is perfect. But this right here, the high strength, is going in my Corvette, and this right here, the high strength, is going in my drift car, and we're gonna be supercharging it. Also, if you have an off-road vehicle where your drive shafts are at steep angles, you might wanna go for the super strength. But for a normal car or daily driver, this is perfectly fine, just another option to consider. And all these U-joints come with the proper retaining clips, so you can do a complete install in your vehicle. I'll be sure to link all these different types of U-joints in the description so you can check them out, as well as all the different tools that you'll need for this job. And let's go get started. Let me show you how to remove the U-joint. The first thing you want to do, very, very important, because you're going to be taking the drive shaft out, you need to chock off the wheels. Since the drive shaft is going to get removed, even if your car's in park, the transmission's disconnected and your car might roll. You want to be very safe under your vehicle, chock off the wheels, engage the emergency brake, and we could get started. Now before we get started, we want to put on our safety glasses. And before removing any of these bolts to take the drive shaft out, you want to grab a paint marker, and you want to mark the differential to the flange and the flange to the drive shaft. And do the exact same thing to the front of the drive shaft. Mark everything so you can match it back up. That way when we remove the drive shaft, we could reinstall it exactly in line where it is right now. And you definitely want to do this because all of this is lined up and balanced from the factory. You can actually see a balance weight right here. So we want to be able to install this exactly the way it is so we won't run into any vibration issues. Now we can go and remove the drive shaft. It's simple to do. There's 2 bolts on this side and 2 bolts on the opposite side. When those come out, this will come down. I like to spray penetrating fluid on the bolts that hold the drive shaft in to make them easier to remove. And you might as well spray the ends of the U-joint so they can start soaking for when we remove them later on. Now every car will be different, but in this case, my truck uses a 12-point bolt, so make sure you use a 12-point socket. So let's get in there with our breaker bar and break it free. Good. And now we can loosen it the rest of the way, and to make it quick and easy, I'm using a ratcheting wrench. And beautiful, that's the first one out. Now let's do the bottom one, and loosen it up the rest of the way with a wrench. That's the second one, so let's get the last 2 bolts on the other side. Follow the same exact process, crack it loose with the breaker bar, and finish it off with the wrench. Good. On to the last one here, and this one isn't coming off. That's pretty tight on there. So if this happens to you, don't worry, there's a simple solution to help loosen this bolt, and that's using a torch and heating up the metal surrounding the bolt. The heat's gonna expand this metal and loosen its grip on the bolt. And after about a minute or 2 of heating it up, you could easily break it loose with a breaker bar, and then start loosening it up with the wrench. Now before we remove this bolt completely, I like to slide a jack stand under the drive shaft so the drive shaft won't fall down. Now we can loosen the bolt the rest of the way, and with all 4 bolts removed, give the yoke a tap because it's probably stuck on there. Good, now the back is free. So with the rear of the drive shaft disconnected, now we can move to the front. And if you're working on the front, you should have a drip pan ready just in case. Because in most vehicles, in the front, the drive shaft and the yoke is gonna slide right out of the transmission. And you'll know it does that because there's no bolts holding this in. But in this scenario on my truck, this doesn't slide out. It won't budge. We have to remove these 4 bolts again. So I'm gonna quickly do that. That's 1, that's 2, 3, and 4. Then tap the edge of the yoke to vibrate it loose. Good, and now we can carefully remove the drive shaft, being sure not to drop it or bang it around. If you dent or bend the drive shaft, you're gonna have to replace it. Alright, so with our drive shaft removed, now I can show you how to replace the U-joints. And like I said before, we're gonna be using 2 different methods. We're gonna be using the press method and the hammer method. So you wanna find yourself a good place to work, a workbench, or I'm using my tailgate and a little portable workbench. And if you have a vise, is gonna make this job really simple. If you don't have a vise, you could use something like a clamp and clamp the drive shaft to a bench. Now, no matter what you use, never clamp down on the tube of the drive shaft. This tube isn't designed to get an outside force pushing inwards like this. And you could easily dent or bend it, and that'll ruin the drive shaft. It'll cause vibrations and ruin the structural integrity. So instead, what you want to do is you want to clamp down at the end of the drive shaft, either at the yoke or flange, or right here on the drive shaft where it's structurally supported. So with the drive shaft clamped in, the first thing we want to do is remove the retaining clip. And there's 2 styles of retaining clips. So this is the first style. All you have to do is grab some type of needle nose pliers. Ones that have a little lip on the edge is really nice. You get the tips of the pliers on the clip, squeeze down, and pull the clip out just like that. It's that easy. So let's flip the drive shaft over and do the others. And that retaining clip is stuck in there. So soak it in some penetrating fluid and work your way around the clip with a flathead screwdriver to free it up. And if you break the clip just like I did, don't worry. Just use the flathead screwdriver and hammer it out. So that's the second clip removed, and that's the third one. And finally, that's the last one. So now that all 4 retaining clips are removed, we're ready to remove the U-joint. But real quick, before we do that, this U-joint uses an external type retaining clip. And there's one more style I want to show you, just in case you encounter it. And that is this type of U-joint. You can see here, there's no external clip on this U-joint. So instead, it uses these little internal C-clips, which are found back here. So to remove this style clip, what you do is you get your flathead screwdriver, and you can see the edge of the clip is right there. You want to get your screwdriver and put it right at the edge. Then hammer the screwdriver to pop it out and remove it the rest of the way with the pliers. And same thing for the other side. Hammer it out as much as you can and pull it out the rest of the way with the pliers. And that's all there is to it. I just wanted to show you that real quick, just in case you have these inside clips rather than the outside clips, so now you know what you need to do. Alright, so once you're done removing the retaining clips, the next step is to remove and replace the U-joint. And to do that, I'm going to be showing you the first method, which is using a press. This is actually really simple. The press fits right in this hole, like so, and we're going to press that U-joint downwards. And so you can see what's going on at the bottom, I'm going to turn this sideways. Now at the bottom of the press, it's important that you don't block the U-joint from coming out. If this press is like that, the U-joint is going to get stopped, and you're not going to be able to push it out. So you want to align the press just like that, so the U-joint is free to move all the way out. And at the top, we want the press to press the U-joint right in the center. So let's spray some penetrating fluid in there, which will help lubricate the U-joint and make it easier to press out. Now we're ready to tighten this down, and the easiest way to do it is with an impact gun. It makes it real simple. You just buzz it right down, and that'll press right out. But since not everyone has an impact gun, I'm just gonna be using one of these ratchets. It's extendable so I could get more leverage. All you have to do is tighten it down. And you wanna tighten the press until the U-joint cap pops all the way out like that. Then we could flip it over and use the pliers, like these tongue and groove pliers, to pull the cap out. Just twist and pull and it should come right out. Now we can press the U-joint end the other way until it bottoms out and it won't press anymore. Then flip it over and remove the other cap. And with both caps removed, now the U-joint has enough room to come out. Alright, so it's that simple, and we're applying the same method to remove the U-joint from the flange. Spray some penetrating fluid to make it easier to press out, tighten the press until the U-joint pops out, then we could flip it over, grab our pliers, and remove the cap. Now we have the clearance to remove the U-joint, and it's really that simple. Now before we install the new U-joint, we need to prep both the flange and the drive shaft. So grab a thin screwdriver or pick, and the first thing to do is to clean out the retaining clip channels. You want to remove all the loose rust and dirt so the new retaining clips could snap all the way in. Next, grab a file, and we want to deburr the edge of the bore. On the drive shaft end, you can see there's a large burr, which is a perfect example of why this step's so important. Burrs could damage the new U-joint when you go to press them in. So carefully, lightly file around the whole edge. You don't want to remove a lot of material. Just smooth out that edge like this. One last thing, make sure you don't scratch the inside bore with the file. You only want to get right on the edge. So after deburring both the top edge and the bottom edge of the bore so it's no longer rough, the next thing to do is grab a scouring pad or 1000 grit sandpaper and lightly clean the inside of the bore to remove any surface rust. The goal here is to have a clean, smooth surface for our new U-joints to get pressed into. So clean up the retaining clip channels, deburr the edges, and clean out the inside of the bores for the flange and the drive shaft. Now both the drive shaft and the flange are cleaned up and ready to go, so let me show you how to install a brand new U-joint. First, you want to remove any two caps opposite of each other. That way you could slide the U-joint into the flange. And anytime you remove the caps, a quick tip is to always inspect the inside of the cap and make sure the needle bearings haven't fallen down. And if they have, just restack them with a clean flathead screwdriver. Now we could add the caps, and you're going to push it in by hand, and you want to make sure it goes in straight, not at an angle. And then get the press and press each cap in. You want to press it so it just passes the retaining clip channel, and then you could install the retaining clip, making sure it pops into the channel. Now we want to do the same thing to the other side. Press that cap in and install the retaining clip. Good. Alright, it is that simple to install a new U-joint. So the U-joint is in the flange, and one thing I want to test is to see how hard it is to move this U-joint. And this U-joint is really hard to move. If we installed it like this in the truck, those bearings could burn out and cause the U-joint to go bad. This U-joint shouldn't be this hard to move. So a little trick, grab your hammer and you want to tap right on the edge of the flange. A couple of taps on one side and a couple of taps on the other, and check that out. That is so easy to move now. There is no resistance. So with that all done, now let's install our drive shaft to the U-joint. And you remember we made these marks on the drive shaft, so we want to line that up with the marks on the flange. So make sure you line it up so we install the flange and the drive shaft in the correct orientation. So remove the caps, fit the U-joint into the drive shaft like so, install the top cap and the bottom cap, and press in each cap so that you can install the retaining clips. Now flip it over and repeat the process. Press the cap in all the way and install the retaining clip. One last thing to do, just like before with the flange where we loosened it up with the hammer, it's nice and smooth. We want to do the same thing for the drive shaft because this is hard to move. So tap both ears of the drive shaft to settle the U-joint into place. And perfect, nice and loose. Finally, we need to add some grease. And you want to use a high temperature wheel bearing grease. So grab your grease gun, and since it's pretty tight in here, the nozzle doesn't fit. One thing I do with the grease gun tip is shave down one side of the nozzle with a grinder to make it thinner. And that works perfect. Now it fits and we could pump the grease into the U-joint. You want to pump until you start seeing grease come out of the boots like that. Then get in there and clean that grease up so it doesn't fling everywhere when you go for a drive. Good. And that's all there is to it. That's how you use a press to replace a U-joint. Now that you know how to press it out, let's flip this drive shaft around, and we have one more U-joint to replace, and for this I'm going to show you the hammer method. With the flange clamped down, add some penetrating fluid, and you want to use the largest socket you could find that fits inside the U-joint hole. This one is perfect. So now we can hammer this out. Just put the socket against the U-joint cap, and you want to hammer straight down using pretty strong hits. And that's all there is to it. So let's remove the cap and slide the U-joint out of the flange. Now we're going to sit the drive shaft on top of the vise, so close up the vise a little, and the drive shaft will stay in place as we hammer that U-joint out. Then flip it over and remove the cap from the drive shaft. Now the U-joint comes right out. So with the drive shaft and the flange completely prepped, all the clip channels are cleaned out, it's deburred, and the bores are cleaned so it's nice and smooth, now we can install the new U-joint. So remove the caps and fit the U-joint into the drive shaft. Add the caps to each side, and carefully hammer the caps into place so you can install the retaining clip. Flip the drive shaft over and follow the same exact procedure. And it's really this simple, there's nothing to it. Finally, let's get the U-joint fitted into the flange like so, add the cap to the top and to the bottom, hammer the cap into place, and install the retaining clip. Now we can flip the drive shaft over and repeat. Hammer the cap in and install the retaining clip. Don't forget to tap the outside of the ears on the flanges and the drive shaft to settle the U-joint. And lastly, add some grease. So there we go. Now you know how to properly replace U-joints using both the press method and the hammer method. And this drive shaft has brand new U-joints in it and is ready to go in the truck. Actually, there's one more very important thing I want to show you real quickly. This is a drive shaft from a Chevy Colorado, and I got it from a junkyard just to show you this because it's that important. If you follow the drive shaft all the way to the end, you could see this little hole here, and there's also 2 holes at the end of the yoke, and these holes are plastic injected. It's mostly found on General Motors vehicles, but I wanted to show you because if you do have this, you're not going to be able to press out or hammer out these U-joints without first melting the plastic out. All you have to do is get a torch, heat up the plastic in each ear until it's melted, which is going to take a few minutes. And then once it's melted, you can press out that U-joint. And I thought that was pretty important to include, so if you have plastic injected U-joints, now you won't get stuck and you know how to replace them. And when you do replace them, don't worry about the plastic that was in there. You don't use that anymore. You'll use all the retaining clips that come with the brand new U-joint. So now let's get back to installing the drive shaft in my truck so we could go for a test drive. So get the drive shaft in place, then use a wire brush to brush away the loose rust on both mating surfaces so they bolt up nice and flat. After that, we need to match the green lines so we can install this exactly the way we removed it. Then tighten all 4 bolts by hand, and be sure to use removable thread locker on each of them to prevent vibrations from loosening them out as you drive. And since our torque wrench doesn't fit, I'm using a long wrench to tighten down the bolts in a crisscross pattern to about 80 foot-pounds. And the last thing I like to do is mark the bolts so you know if any have loosened after I go drive around. Alright, with the front done, let's bolt in the rear. It's the same process. Clean the mating surfaces so they're nice and smooth, align the drive shaft to our marks, add the bolts with the thread locker on them, tighten them all down in a crisscross pattern to 80 foot-pounds, and mark them with a paint marker so we know if they loosen. And there you go. It's that simple to replace your U-joints. With the drive shaft in, let's go for a ride. All right, my favorite part, the test drive. I don't hear any noise, I don't feel any vibration. This truck feels great, and that is how you replace your U-joints. So hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, remember to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. As always, all the products and tools I used in this video are linked in the description.